Okay, I think it's probably good enough to kick off. Look, super excited to welcome everyone today to this event, I guess being run by Aurora Digital with Tech UK promoting and supporting this. And hopefully we've been able to secure an incredible lineup of speakers for you on a very topical subject, the evolution of L&D, a space which is very topical right now, and is certainly seeing a lot of increase in funding and investment from what we're seeing from our side anyway. As a background, Aurora Digital, what we do is we help to showcase great tech, and we work closely as a result of that with partners like Tech UK, and that's why we kind of run these sorts of events. Today's event, what we've got here is we've got views from leading banks. So we've got ING and we've got Standard Chartered, we've got specialized consultants here, so we've got Morehouse, and we've got Asset Class. And then we've got a couple of cracking L&D companies that are doing really exciting things in this space. So we've got Imarticus and Fuse talking from their perspective about what they're doing in this space. So look, really hope you enjoy the event and really would like to hear your feedback afterwards as well. In the interim, what I will do is I'll hand you over to our moderator, Paris.
Thank you, Sandeep, and thank you, Aurora Digital, for organizing today. Excited to be here and moderating this session. Firstly, warm welcome to everyone attending. Just as introductions, we've got today with us, we've got Rajesh from ING, we've got Suman from Standard Chartered Bank, we've got Mike from Asset Class, we've got Nikhil from Imarticus, we've got Lisa from Morehouse, and we've got Steve from Fuse Universal. So COVID-19, and a lot has changed across the domain, or across the world rather, since this happened about just over a year ago. We're going to have a couple of discussions around how this has impacted the financial services space. Hopefully many of you that are attending today will be able to take away things that you can use in your day-to-day work. The panelists will be more than happy to answer questions. So if you have something in mind, do throw that into the chat, and I'll try and take questions as we go on. So without further ado, starting with the first topic, lessons learned from the pandemic. And this has been a time of revolution and evolution. Let's go to Nikhil first. Nikhil, tell us a bit about Imarticus, yourself, and what your thoughts have been about the evolutions that's happened.
Sure. Thank you, Paras. Nice to meet you all. My name is Nikhil. I am the founder and CEO of Untitled Learning. My personal background a little bit. I spent a lot of time with Lehman in New York early on in the day, and then I moved to India for 2 years, which keeps getting extended, and then I ended up working for Nomura for a bit. We started Imarticus Learning back in 2013. And when we started, we started with the idea of creating a company that does domain-based education in a fair amount of depth. So I think in India at that particular point of time, there was a lot of K-12 education, there was a lot of higher education, but professional vocational education was not developed, and we didn't see a lot of players with that. So Imarticus was started with that intent. Today, in interest of time, I'll save you the pain and glory story, but Imarticus Learning is, in the last 7 years, has trained over about 50,000 learners in offline and online formats. We've worked extensively with large corporates in India, Middle East, and Southeast Asia. We have over 200 active clients in banking, IT, and analytics. Today, we help them with the recruitment and talent challenges that range from finding the right talent to helping them upskill their junior and senior personnel, and frankly, making them more relevant and productive. Our offerings range from offline and online training, creating subscription-based or even custom content. And also we sort of help with sort of human talent solutions where we are able to source, train in people in scale. So that's a little bit about Imarticus Learning. Paras mentioned a little bit about COVID, etc. So I think calling last year interesting would be an understatement of the year. I think the very basics and foundations of business have sort of changed. I think today businesses are reeling from different types of shocks. We haven't seen turmoil like this and things that we've taken for granted are under fire from all directions. I think more than, I think the L&D disruption, the word comes to mind, and specifically around L&D too. So let me spend a few minutes on, what are the trends or what are the things that we saw over the last 1 year or so. The first thing we saw was that most businesses were trying to solve sort of an existential problem. So it wasn't about how do I get my people trained, but it was more about how do I survive, or how do I figure out a new way to talk to customers? How do I deliver a seamless experience? How do I pivot to new markets and new business models, right? So L&D in a lot of cases, I thought, were right there with the frontline guys learning and teaching at the same time. And I think the people who got it right, will be true partners and enablers for the business, etc. Over a period of, today I'm going to highlight a few examples that we saw from some of our client base. And for interest of, I'm going to only highlight the good examples that we saw from our clients and where we worked with them and hopefully delivered, I think, an experience which was much better than the pre-COVID era. So I mentioned to you, we have large clients. We work with Citibank, Barclays, and UBS, where we help sort of train they hire lots and lots of people, technology and finance graduates. We help train those people. And I think training those people in an offline format was complete, almost like a flagship program. I think, Mike, you've done this. You've seen this with Deutsche Bank earlier in your previous, I hear. So I think the idea, we used to do this in an offline format, and now we have to do it virtually. So I think designing this entire piece for these clients, etc., where not only the offline touch points were kept in place, but we created new touch points like, AI-based assessments, where we were able to create virtual sprints for projects, simulations, etc. And I think all of that, coupled with sort of a virtual coding platform, is what we delivered to the. So this is an example of a good where we took something which worked well in offline, but we made it better, frankly. The second piece, I thought that a lot of the L&D challenges or L&D people struggled with this idea of engagement and social learning. So we obviously, I don't know about you guys, but I'm sick of working from home. So I now come to office and I'm the only one in the office. So I think moving away from the office has been a significant challenge. I think, it was difficult to get people in a room before to train. Now it's even more difficult with their personal and work issues, etc. So I think the questions L&D managers asked us is about, how do I engage a disconnected sort of workforce? Can I use learning to do that? So I think there are, again, examples. One example that comes to mind particularly is with Infosys, which is the large IT company in India. We sort of created a curated BFSI training calendar for them. But more importantly, we were able to add sort of engagement touch points complete with leaderboards and competitions and all sorts of brandings, which helped us to get those completion rates to 90%. Last but not the least, I think people realized, and I think L&D managers realized, that online training was just not offline training done online, right? I think we did that in the first 7-10 days, where everything went to go Zoom and GoTo, and frankly, some of them stayed there, but some of them actually started thinking about, well, how do I use this method, use this medium better? So how do I use e-learning better? And I think, again, I have multiple examples around with PNP Paribas or Future Generale, where they were able to actually create content in a seamless way, which actually made the overall experience better. Paras, let me pause. I'll hand it over back to you. Hopefully that got us started.
No, actually, there's some really good examples you spoke about, and especially when you talk about seamless learning experiences, especially at a time when, for a lot of corporates, it's been about existence and scale, and using technology to do that. Is there something, you referred around offline and online? Before I go on to Lisa, just for you, in terms of the technology use, how quickly were people able to adapt to this?
So I'll give you, I think the best way to highlight it is through, so we used to, in the offline format, we did all sorts of workshops around simulation workshops for our clients, right? So BNP used to run a trade life cycle sort of simulation for us. Now, the idea was to do that in a virtual format, do it faster, do it tomorrow, and please don't increase my cost. So those are the type of mandates we were getting, etc. In some areas, like where we were able to use technology better than before, I think has been in around certification prep. SocGen is a large client for us, and we do a lot of prep-based certification, like a CSI type of certification. I think we actually turned that program on its head, and we actually now have created sort of an assessment-first program along with online mentoring. I think that particular program has given us better outcomes. So I think using it smartly and not spraying it all over in terms of online learning, e-learning is something that I think we learned ourselves, and I think our L&D partners helped us learn over the last 9 months or so.
Fantastic. And that sort of is a great point for me to go to Steve. Steve, you're doing a lot around how tech is enabling L&D. Tell us a bit firstly about Fuse Universal, and then, how have you helped, and where have the lessons come on when it comes to the impact of the pandemic?
Sure. So Steve Denin, President under Fuse. We're mainly a digital learning platform. That's where 90% of our business is. We have about 3-4 million people use our platform globally across the world, from brands like Dropbox and Vodafone and Merck and others. And the first thing that we saw when I guess COVID hit was a doubling in the traffic of our platforms overnight. So pretty much straight away that the need for digital learning became obviously much greater. And our platform is I guess it's the opposite of Zoom, so it's more asynchronous, more akin to YouTube, LinkedIn, Google type stuff. So how do you find knowledge? How do you update knowledge? And how do you get knowledge at point of need? And what we found, I think, in our clients is, in essence, the first thing we found was those that already built the muscles of modern digital learning were running at the problems their organizations had really fast. So if we look at someone like Vodafone in the UK, they were able to retrain all of their retail center staff, 5,500 people within weeks, to be from retail staff to customer agents, because the L&D teams had skills to actually be able to move what was predominantly face-to-face training now to predominantly kind of digital learning. You look at other brands, we had like Ocado. Overnight, they got to retrain every driver to be updated with what's your new door-to-step policy. So beforehand, the driver could greet the person, shake their hands, give them a hug if they want. I'm not sure that's in the policy, but they could quite happily, have. Whereas that next morning, obviously, everyone's got to be updated on what you do on the doorstep, how do you interact on the doorstep. And then every couple of days, right, the rules are changing. So how do you continuously update people and get them informed and so forth? So again, we found those type of organizations adapting really, really well. I think if you look at the companies that hadn't maybe invested in becoming modern digital learning organizations, then there's lots of question marks for that, right? Because the only thing you can try and do is run into a Teams and a Zoom world. And that's tough, right? That's tough to be sitting on 4 or 5 day Zoom calls, being trained is not really an effective way to go do that. So I think what we in essence saw was, without being harsh, right? You probably saw a lot more furloughed staff in traditional L&D organizations, whereas you saw the ones that already had maybe really understood the use of digital and have maybe moved to modern platforms and modern ways of creating content. They were working around the clock, absolutely insanely working around the clock while they're creating great value for their organizations, allowing them to be agile and to have to constantly change. Because I think the overarching thing that obviously COVID has done to our industry is accelerated it 5 years in 5 months. So, what's happened is 2 double impacts. You've got digital disruption in general now accelerating. So you look at a client of ours like Avon, overnight, right? It's got 5 million beauty entrepreneurs around the world selling Avon's beauty products face to face, and now they've got to sell that through digital mechanisms. They've got to learn how to sell on Facebook Live, on Instagram, on WhatsApp broadcast messages. So overnight, literally there are millions of people having to their businesses. I mean, Avon's business has always wanted to go digital, but they didn't expect to do it at that speed. So digital disruption has massively accelerated the move of so many organizations, and therefore L&D is trying to keep up with that, saying, well, we haven't got 5 years to do it anymore. We've got 5 days to go and actually help this transformation that's happening. So, I think we've been effective because we got to go digital quicker, but the businesses we're servicing are going digital faster. Therefore, the need is a double whammy. So, on our side, though, it's been great, right? The market's moved towards us, rapidly. So, we're in a place where we're able to create even more value and to see that, I guess, the vision of what we had for the world is being more helpful in a shorter time period.
Well, that's great, Stephen. And honestly, there was one thing you said about the delivery, the way people would deliver and should deliver. Today, all of us would die for a hug, someone known ideally. But yes, that's something. And you referred to social selling a little bit. And I'm going to actually, where we're talking about new modes of business, and this is just very quickly for you, Steve. What, people like Avon and others, what was the model of operation suddenly? Was there a bit of hybrid, and did that help in any sense of implementation?
So you mean in terms of, their business moves, social selling, how do you mean?
Yeah, in terms of the business itself,
yeah.
Did you see them use online and offline collectively well?
Especially from offline effectively stopped, right? So offline training effectively stopped. So you've only got two mechanisms. It's asynchronous and synchronous learning. So you've got a combination of using Zoom, Facebook Live, and so forth to train. But obviously, their big investment was in, utilizing the platforms like ours that they already have to be able to. So our traffic, for that audience is we're in 51 countries, 51 languages, and helping that transition from teaching people how to sell socially. So their number one program, obviously on the platform, is social selling skills. So it's them capturing their best experts in each local market upon how do they use social selling tools such as YouTube and WhatsApp and Facebook and Facebook Live and so forth. So what they're doing is they're bottling the greatness of their best people using social selling skills and then making that available to the whole audience. And the people are in essence moving now away from this. And the most interesting statistic is in all our clients is when they look at what makes someone perform the best, it's not them going through a course. I mean, Avon did a really piece of interesting research where they looked at the million odd people going through using the platform. They looked at the people that went formally through courses and asked the question and said, if people go through lots of content in one go, so basically a course-based approach, what's the difference in performance? And the performance difference was about 6% difference in overall revenue for those 100,000 people looked at that. The people that create the habits of being a modern continuous learner, so going back to the platform for bits of learning, so they're going back and using the platform in a way that you use Google. So I'm going to go search for that thing. I'm going to learn how do I set my Instagram account up, and I'm going to do it. So I'm going to learn really close to the thing I'm doing. I'm going to learn 5 minutes and apply. Search, find and apply, search, find and apply. So the people who've got these habits of now being curious and going in, popping in and getting new bits of knowledge, going back, refreshing and so forth, their difference in performance was 300% more revenue over a 6-month period. And we've seen this continuously in case studies throughout our client space, that it's the habits of creating a continuous learning culture and an organization where they're now measuring. So Avon this year, in 2020, they started with their goal, like most companies, how many people do we want to train or certify this year? Now with the data, clearly it's saying that's not the goal in 2021. For their 5 million beauty entrepreneurs, the number one attribute is how many continuous learners are they creating, measured by the frequency they come back to the platform, which is exactly the same measurements that Facebook or YouTube or others would look to say the success of their platform. So I think that's a huge, and I think across all our clients, the data tells us the same thing. Those that are moving away from course-centric approaches, where it's kind of impossible to stuff all the knowledge in a course into someone's head, right? We always knew that, right? But there just wasn't maybe a better way to doing it. Now we're finding is the tools and the technologies and so forth have caught up that allow this new way to be designed and this new habit to be embedded.
Fantastic, and this shows how rapidly businesses have actually changed. So for people listening in, I think one of the key things all of us have experienced and are hoping you can take away from this session as well is the speed at which we evolved through this time. Lisa, coming to you, and I understand one of the areas of work that you've spent time in, and something you could share a little bit more about is, when there's a large scale of hiring, and I'll come to you and Mike with similar questions on this. When you talk about onboarding and virtual onboarding as such, what have been the lessons that you feel, your clients or you've seen in terms of how they've managed to do that well?
Right, so hi everyone, I'm Lisa. I'm a people and change consultant from Morehouse. So we've been talking to our clients about lots of these things, and similarly to Steve and Nikhil, almost needing to do things overnight. We needed to have all these new answers and all these new ways of doing it, and that lovely balance of trying to prove that you've thought about it, but also doing it very, very quickly and quicker than anyone else. And the virtual onboarding piece was huge. We actually went through it as a company ourselves. We're in a period of growth at the moment, so we had used some of that experience, good and bad, to talk to various different clients about. And one of the things we did from the very beginning, and sounds really, really simple, but we started looking through what can we replicate. So what things about doing this in person can you just do in an online setting? That covered some of it. then you start looking at actually what can't you replicate and why. So what do you need to do differently? And again, to some of the points that have been made here today, that's on the one side, that's what can you not do as well? Let's be honest, what is just not as good doing it online and over a screen? So what do you need to change? But also, what are the opportunities of doing this? So to kind of bring that to life a little bit, I guess some of the key things that we found were some of the really obvious things around making time for people, sharing all of the information. That's all something you can do online. You might need to tweak it slightly, but all of those principles are still there. The hardest thing we found is that informal getting to know people, the water cooler chats, the making a cup of tea, the I'll just pop over and speak to that person in that team. That was a lot harder. So we had to start thinking about things like we had kind of an open tea break room where it was just it was an open Teams channel. And if people wanted to drop in and have a chat, they could. It didn't work as well, I'll be completely honest, but it was a way to try and get some of that informality. Other things that we found that were a little bit easier, and actually we will continue to do, is we used to have to be, this is the way that our business model works. We're consultants, so we're billed out to clients full time. We have a full-time job as well as doing these sorts of things on the side as well. And it was really hard to carve out time away from your client role. You had to leave the client site to go onto the Morehouse site to have a conversation. You had to, secret yourself away in a coffee shop to have a call during work hours. And now, of course, the concept of things like work hours has changed completely. So it's a lot easier for people to drop in. So it's a lot easier to spend an hour on a call with a client, drop in for 15 minutes and check in on somebody. So these are the sorts of benefits that we found, but really taking it back to the basics and, what can we just shift online and what works, and where do we need to be a little bit more creative?
Fantastic. And Mike, you from your previous experience, especially at Deutsche, you had a lot of experience onboarding staff, especially at the graduate recruitment level. Where do you think the lessons were in terms of that space as well through this time?
So yes, you're quite right. I was previously responsible for product training at Deutsche Bank, pretty much for the last 20 years or so. So that's graduates all the way through to board members. And the graduate piece is a really interesting one, because what we do at Deutsche is we take in roughly, it varies year from year, but roughly 750 graduates every year globally into the investment bank, into corporate finance, and into asset management. What we do is we fly them all into London, so it's a global program. So there's all the costs based around that of flying them in, accommodating them. Used to be about 6 weeks. We've now brought it down to around about 3 weeks or so. So clearly with the pandemic, we had to change that. Prior to the pandemic, even 2-3 years ago, we were always using a lot of e-learning, fairly obviously, even though we had this global program. And I think we know what the added value of that e-learning was even 3 years ago. So for example, we could do a lot of pre-course e-learning on basic core topics so that everybody's up to speed prior to their main learning. We can test their knowledge through quizzes, multi-choice, all that sort of stuff, even prior to them arriving on the main program. So that's great. We can also do a lot of post-course follow-ups, sort of 6 months down the line, 12 months down the line. And actually, it's also very good, we find, for really doing something that's job specific. So, if you've got 750 grads, you'll find that, a year into their roles, actually, they're all doing quite different roles. There could be 25, 30 different roles there. It's very difficult to get into, a classroom environment for those 30 different roles. And e-learning is fantastic for saying, okay, we can actually split this out now and find pathways and roadmaps for specific roles for specific grads at points in time. So we know all those added value things have been there for many years now in terms of the e-learning. And most of us, I think, have been using that. And also we know what the quality is in advance. So, you can see the e-learning, you can look at the quality. That's not always necessarily the same in terms of a classroom where there's, so many more variables. You don't necessarily know exactly what's going to happen in that classroom. And so much of it depends on, the quality of the trainer. So there's a lot of added value to e-learning. We then had to step back, I think, as well, and say, well, what was the objective of flying everybody into London? And periodically over the last 20 years, we've looked at this probably every 3 years or so and said, should we really be doing this? And every time the answer comes back from senior management, middle management, and the grads themselves is that, yes, we want to do this. There's two objectives to doing this type of training. One is just the technical knowledge. And frankly, you can get that technical knowledge, you know, anywhere. You can do it in Mumbai, Singapore, Tokyo, New York, whatever, that's fine. But the other objective really is we're trying to build a cohort of grads with a very specific culture that, you know, 3 years into their careers, 5 years, 10 years, they can pick up the phone to somebody in Sydney and go, you know, hi, do you remember me? I haven't spoken to you for a couple of years, but we're on the grad program. That is what we're trying to build, that type of culture. And the difficulty, I think, really that we've not necessarily solved by any means is how do you actually get that into a virtual environment? Now, you know we can do virtual quizzes, virtual lunches, virtual breakfasts. There's a lot of simulation work around trading games, gamification, putting groups into teams and getting those teams to work together and frequently changing the teams. But frankly, it's not the same as having people in the same place for 3 or 4 weeks. You know, you do an hour and a half of learning in a classroom, and then you go and have coffee and you all chat, you know, and at the end of 4 weeks, pretty much you say to those grads, how many people do you know out of 750? It's like, well, I know 400 of them really well. And the rest of them I know by sight and I know their name and I'd be comfortable talking to them. That I think is the area where possibly that, you know, e-learning and the whole sort of structure around how we do this, we need to put more thought into how do we get those virtual meetings and that culture developed out of e-learning. And maybe it's not possible, I don't know. But that to me was one of the key challenges that we faced and we will face going forward as well, because we will be cutting down the classroom amount without doubt. It's a question of now of how do we cut that down without losing a lot of that culture and that team building ethos.
That's such an important point. The culture and team building is one of the key reasons how L&D supports building the function and the business further, rather. So before we go any further, I want to get a gauge from the audience as well. We're going to throw out a poll quickly just to see what are the biggest learnings that you've seen in L&D in your company through COVID-19. Was it agility? Was it around upskilling and reskilling? Or was it, you know, digitalization of L&D? So the poll's open now. If you can put in your vote, we'll quickly see where the audience sentiment is. We'll keep this poll running for about 20 seconds more.
I see that hosts and panelists can't vote. That's not fair.
Trying to gauge what the audience thinks here, because we will have an opinion on this.
We don't want any skewed distributions here.
Okay, another 5 seconds. 3, 2, 1. Okay, let's see what the results look like. We're going to try and close the poll now. It's just quite an equal split. There's 33% of you who said agility was a challenge, or was an area of learning rather. Reskilling, 33% again said reskilling was a learning, reskilling and upskilling. About 42%, which is a winner by a small margin, said that digitalization was the biggest learning. And I think that's, you know, as businesses evolve, these will be things that we see companies put more focus on. I'm going to try and go to my next discussion topic with this. And Lisa, coming back to you, tell us in terms of trends and innovations that you saw, what is being done well? Where are companies that you work with enhancing L&D? And just tell us a bit more about Morehouse as well, please.
Yeah, of course. So I've been working in the learning space for over 10 years, and I'm genuinely delighted to be seeing so much current interest in the future of L&D across the market. Particularly as we know, usually in times of economic downturn, L&D is one of the first things to go, and that doesn't seem to be the case this time. So that's fantastic. And you know, this session isn't necessarily for me to talk to about the impact of the pandemic, but I don't think any of us can get away from that at the moment. That's had a huge impact over the last year or so. But there have been some wider themes growing in organizations over the years as well. So I'm going to talk just a little bit about the things that I'm seeing, some of those trends, and where I think and hope we're going, as well as some of the conversations that we're actively having with people too. So I'm going to talk to a couple of different points. I'll add to the point around the opportunities of online learning, the importance of building learning cultures, that's cropped up already, and then the rise in individual and self-learning as well. So I think over the last year, they've been characterized obviously by online learning, and a point we've already made is how that has accelerated our view of the benefits and the opportunities. It was very easy for people to say before that it wasn't good enough or it didn't do the job, and unfortunately we've all been forced to learn that a lot of the time that isn't the case now. As we're looking at kind of going back to whatever normal is going to be, or a hybrid way of working, organizations are starting to look at how do we take what's the best from this situation and enhance those learning experiences. So I thought I'd talk about two different training projects that I've been involved in over the last year, because it's quite interesting to compare the two. They both utilize blended learning, but in different ways. So the first one started pre-COVID. It was a systems implementation rollout, and they were very clear that hands-on classroom training was the way that they wanted to go with that. They didn't have an e-learning option in place. Now, the reason for that was actually more to the point made earlier around the impact of social learning. The users of this system wouldn't all have been using it in the same way. So they didn't want the point of the sessions to be to tell them the knowledge around how to use it. It was much more about them understanding how they would integrate that into their jobs. COVID hit. We had to move everything online. We ended up getting great feedback. It did go really well, but we had to do a lot of work about how we could replicate that piece around that social learning element, and trying to get the best out of things like online forums to get people discussing things together. The second project had blended learning included from the start. So they wanted an e-learning module to supplement classroom training. So that was, as Mike had said, something that people could familiarize themselves with upfront. So to get the kind of basics, I guess, out of the way and everybody on the same page, but also something that people could go back to and learn in their own time. And one of their key drivers for this was a very high number of users. So they were looking very much at all these different learning styles and how we could tap into both. So I think what's really interesting is they both said hands-on classroom training is the best way to learn a new system. And I would tend to agree, but both utilized, whether through choice or not at the beginning, different ways of online learning to add to that. And both would agree that added very much to the experience. Now, obviously blended learning isn't new, but I do think this is something that's going to continue to grow as the years go on. So looking at learning cultures, and this is something that we've been actively exploring with clients and how they can build this in their organization. So without going into kind of a definition, because I don't think there really is one, what we at Morehouse mean by a learning culture is, I guess, a shared understanding across an organization of the importance of learning, and that it's something that's embedded and continual and ongoing, and not something that just happens as and when. So we've been spending some time working with a particular organization on this challenge. They've done a really good job of getting senior leadership buy-in to this. Anything, you know, we've all learned lessons before, anything with a cultural steer, you kind of need that top-down input, and had agreed with them a sort of series of initiatives to put in place. And these were things like, you know, broadening out content, encouraging people to take ownership of their learning, putting in place protected learning time. And when launched, it didn't quite land as well as they thought. Nothing bad, it's just it wasn't quite taken up by people. I think the key lesson learned for them was really that bottom-up piece as well as that top-down. You know, you really need to not just allow people to do this, not just give them the time to spend on their learning, but really work with them to get them to understand the benefit for them. Another key challenge was getting them to interact with that learning themselves. A lot of people are used to having learning curated for them. People are told what courses they should go on when and given the materials. And actually now, obviously, we're seeing that people are much more able and much more willing to access content themselves. So we're trying to use this momentum and encourage our clients to build on this and say, actually, it's about the shift of thinking about learning to be something that's always available, something you can dip into, as Steve spoke to earlier. You know, it's at a point of need, not just something that's provided to you as and when. And then the final point, and very related to this, is that rise in individual and self-learning. So pre-pandemic, there was a lot of trends that was fueling this as well. So we are seeing not necessarily the eradication of, but definitely a reduction in the idea of jobs for life. It's relatively easier to move between careers, and the pace of change means that skills need to be refreshed quite a lot. But obviously over the last year, we are also seeing that people are wanting to develop themselves. And this can often just be for their own self-interest as much as anything else. So some organizations are actively embracing this. So we're seeing people moving away from the idea of things like core curriculums and trying to open up a broader menu almost for people to choose from. One in particular we're talking to at the moment around introducing a self-learning approach. So they're setting up a large hub of materials and encouraging people to pick and choose from them as they want to. What I think is so interesting about this, and is very different from that sort of traditional approach where you build your current skill set so you can get better at your current job, get promoted and move up the ladder, is they're actually encouraging people to look directly at skills outside of those they need for their role. And as part of this, also encouraging people to look at whether there might be different areas of the business that they want to work in. A key challenge of this is getting that big suite of materials together. And I think that's almost easier and harder at the moment. I think it's easier to find things that you can access and that you can pull together, but it's a big job trying to keep that current and trying to keep that in place as well. People are just more used to having things at their fingertips. And I think what's really important is to not just look at, what can we replicate online? What can we make available to people anywhere, anytime? But how can we supplement this with articles or videos or TED Talks or forums? So a couple of things there that I just wanted to kind of go through. And to sum up, as I said, we're really excited about these conversations that we're having, the changes that people are making to L&D, because we genuinely think this will improve learning experiences. Obviously accelerated greatly by the pandemic, but also bringing to the fore some of those other themes. And really what we are focusing on working with clients on is let's build on what we've learned over the last year, and let's bring it in alongside those face-to-face elements that we've all missed and that we know are hugely important, because done properly, incorporating online learning into current models and wider models can significantly enhance that experience, and not just having greater access to things, but also encouraging people to rethink learning and that idea of it being continual and something that they can build for themselves, giving them more space to learn in the ways that best work for them, which will benefit organizations because you can tap more and more into people's potential. So hopefully a bit of food for thought there and some ideas around what we're seeing in the market, and we're really keen obviously to hear any other thoughts or examples of where people are doing things differently as well.
Brilliant. Thank you, Lisa. And I think you touched on a really critical topic around culture that helps retention and talent promotion as well. I think, for many companies, that's an area of challenge where today's generation looks at careers, in a company which is 3 to 4 years, 5 years, and if you're in the 6th year, that's actually a great place to be. So I think that investment that companies are making towards L&D, especially in a remote environment, supports this kind of longer-term high talent retention as well. Before I go further to Rajesh, someone tell us a little bit in terms of, when you think about this kind of retention of talent, especially using L&D as an area of focus, what have companies like yourselves done in this area, in a brief note, to say, this helps retention and as well as talent mobility within the organization?
Thanks, Paras. I think it was great to listen to Lisa and the other panelists around this space. A couple of things. I think I'm very fortunate to be part of an organization for whom learning is not an option. It's in our DNA. And as you Standard Chartered invest heavily in terms of building people capability around that. So we call ourselves actually the people capability team. So we are no longer learning and development. I think our step is one notch up in terms of really looking at building people's capability and not just restrict towards training and learning element around it. Coming specific to your question, I think it's an interesting journey that we are into as well. I think so we are in a fast-paced space in terms of really transforming the way we create a culture in the organization, and our partnership around different businesses is towards to create a more sustainable change management concept around it. And we believe that learning or what, as I said, the people capability elements are about really democratizing it across the organization to drive this. So the most important thing that we believe is that the purpose for which you set up this is important to define in the beginning. And when we looked at our organization, we are an organization of close to 100,000 employees across 64 markets. We are dynamic. From a business perspective as well as our scalability perspective, and to really look at how do we do our talent process and how do we help them. We have taken 3 simple steps, and I know I just wanted to kind of share that with you. The first important thing that we have looked is that we started looking at the way people learn differently from at an individual level. So we do not give anything that is one size fits all. So we moved out of that long back, which is a significant move towards really not just personalizing, but as I said, it's democratizing learning a bit more detailed on that space. Number 2 is to really look at the partnership that you do with the ecosystem in bringing this out, because developing talent or supporting talent is no longer one function, one unit responsibility, right? You need to really look at how do you use your ecosystem. When I say ecosystem, I'm talking about using technology. For example, I'm talking about really using our new ways of working mechanism to really bring that to life. So our partnership with the ecosystem internally is extremely at the high in our agenda to really drive some of these things. And the third thing is what we believe is that we need to create the difference through the experience and not through the content. So our belief is your differentiator is the experience you provide and not the content that drives that experience. I think from our perspective, we have really gone deep in terms of looking at these 3 things at the heart of what we are doing to really drive, not just from a specific talent perspective, but as an organizational cultural DNA perspective.
Thank you, Suran. That was some really interesting thoughts. And I think for the audience listening in, it's about each company is going to try and look at aspects, that create a culture that's consistent to what they've been building over the years, but using digitalization, using tools and assets that you come across while keeping people at the center of it has been probably, the area of innovation that's been an area of focus. Rajesh, coming to you, as we talk about innovation, we're talking about trends in the space. What is being done, and are there examples and your experiences that you can share with us as well?
Yeah, thanks, Paras. I'll try to focus on topics that we're currently experiencing, but also topics that don't overlap much with what Lisa mentioned, because everything that she mentioned is actually extremely valuable. And also I have seen it as a user, but also in the bank as a group, we have been doing a lot of the same things that she has mentioned. So I think just to start with the overview, it's definitely seen, like everybody else mentioned, that there's a huge push post-pandemic on how do you look at learning and how do you sort of personalize it. And we have launched a lot of different modules, what we call microlearns. So because of the fact that we could have earlier, people sitting in one room for like a whole day, but the attention span, if you're online and also you're by yourself and let's say isolated, it's impossible to give someone, let's say, a 10-hour coursework, right? So how do you make them bite-sized chunks and microlearns and allow them to have that experience at their own speed? So that's one. And then the other thing is that there's obviously the usual topics as a bank that you have to train your staff in relation to compliance, in relation to, let's say, anti-bribery or things like that. So these are, let's say, around specific skills that is necessary for everyone. But there's also a lot of new skills that we have started focusing on, which have been a theme in the bank, but now all of these are also available digitally. So the skills that we have started, let's say, emphasizing more on is one is how do you look at customer or client experience? And what we mean by that is more and more we see that across the bank, and I mean corporate, retail, investment banking, the discussion has moved from face-to-face interactions and meetings. That how do we sort of like keep that physical and the online mode going, and what are the things to be mindful of? For example, we all jump from calls to different calls, and then if you have a client interaction, how do you be mindful of some of those interactions, what we would say, soft skills or things that are much easier to be mindful of when you're in a physical setting. And also when you talk of the online experience with the customer, like what do they see? Because the way you interact inside a bank is different than how the client perceives the bank, right? So there's an element of customer experience where we started focusing a lot on. One of the key targets also is what we call data fluency. So we have a lot of work that goes around using data as a underlying decision-making skill. And then how do we democratize that as a base, not necessarily to the depths of becoming a data scientist, but understanding why it's relevant, what can we do, and what's not possible, what's possible, so the basics. So that is something also that has been democratized in partnership with some companies, that is available to a lot of people, at least to do the basics. Then one of the other skills that we have, or at least something that we have wanted to make everyone aware of, is cybersecurity. The fact that everybody works from home, they access probably their laptops, etc., from different environments. How do we keep it safe for everyone, and also make them aware of what happens when they're not in, let's say, in an office firewall environment. And last but not the least, how do we keep that gatekeeper role going on from an operational risk management perspective? Because also the nature of risk and risk management has completely changed when you have like thousands of people working from home, right? So bringing back those are more the, let's say, the job specific skills or content based skills. And there's definitely a huge focus on how do you keep your mental health and your well-being under control, or what sort of clues do you look after, or also how do you sort of learn to disconnect or sort of take breaks that are necessary. So there's also a lot of modules that we have launched now which are around personal well-being, family time, because also a lot of people have been taking care of kids or taking care of ill parents, etc. So how do you sort of balance, because that boundary that was there between the work-life balance of office and home is completely changed now. So how do we make sure that people are cognizant of those?
That's fantastic, Rajesh. And it's great to hear about how companies are focusing not just on skill training, but also well-being as an area of interest, given that the lines across, the work-life balance has blurred so much, especially in global firms where people are working across geographies and trying to do more through this time. Nikhil, coming to you, and I know you've done a lot of work around this too. Learning has become a lot about personalization. It's become about, because learning is happening everywhere at today's time, and people want to upskill themselves as well than just the company. What kind of simulations or what kind of examples have you seen around innovative ways where people have done this?
I think to me, for personalization is the answer. Specifically, is the answer when people. I think Lisa, for example, mentioned people lose that sort of when you lose offline training, you lose the coffee break area. And I couldn't agree with her more. But I think the personalization is the answer why you should do this particular thing. Because this idea where people sit in one classroom, listen to sort of one content for all, one training for all, I think in e-learning and online learning, I think you can break that up, right? So personalization to me is the key reason why people should engage, among other things, should engage in the e-learning space. I think what I've seen people do extremely well is create sort of a lot of AI-based assessments. We have clients in Dubai who've done this, where they're able to literally take their entire organization, classify them into different skill gaps by domain, by leadership skills, and there are multiple ways to do that, and create curated learning paths for that. I think to me that's superbly powerful. I think as a user, if you're able to give me content that's relevant to me, up to my skill level, etc., and create a curated path for it, I think that to me is a big tick. So I think that could be in the form of domain, that could be in the form, to your point, Paras, you mentioned simulations, where earlier, for example, if you wanted to do a trade life cycle simulation, it's very difficult to do it in a classroom format. But now I can create a rapid tech tool around it, and we can actually see the trade move from one laptop to the other, and people appreciate that a lot more, etc. So I think it does open up different mediums to actually create personalized content that could be relevant over a long period of time. And also, I think the other thing it does is that, look, we all know that training doesn't stop at the classroom, right? Training sort of goes on after the classroom and after 6 months, after 12 months. And I think being able to curate this curate this journey, if you will, person by person, I think is extremely powerful.
That's a very good point. Learning is definitely a journey, and teams and companies are putting more emphasis on that. Another note to the audience very quickly, if anyone has any questions for our panelists, please put them into the Q&A, and I'll try and take as many as possible. In the meantime, I also want to open the floor to the other panelists. If you had anything for the first two discussions points that we've had, if you would like to ask another co-panelist on something that they've spoken about. If anyone just wants to with a raise of hand, I'll go to them.
I'm more than happy just to add to Nikhil's points just around personalization, because I think obviously I think we see the answer to personalization a lot in consumer technologies, and I think what's really interesting now is how we bring more of those into our learning world. So, for example, if we look at our big release of technologies this year, it's in tune with the learning the flow of work piece. And to be able to use Google's technologies, Amazon's, Microsoft's, in order to first, when you're searching, for example, just as Google is able to personalize your search results for the learning thing you need, the knowledge you need, the bit you need, we're able to do exactly the same thing now. So I think there's a big move in how we think of personalization, maybe at 3 levels. So kind of a macro, micro, and nano level. So a nano level is, I just want to know if I'm Jane Bond or James Bond, do I cut the red wire or the blue wire? I don't necessarily need to know anything about bombs. I just need to know red or blue wire, right? So, give me that instant answer. Let me ask a question in the same way I do Siri or Alexa, and give me the answer at that nano level, right? I think more and more, most of our most evolved clients are now moving between 60 to 90% of what they used to teach in the course, and they're now making that knowledge available, at a point of need, leaving them more time to do maybe the more formal experiences around habits and skill building. And then to the personalization of your micro level, which is more attuned to your YouTube feed, your Facebook feed, because it's not that we don't have habits, despite the first generation of learning, right? We don't have habits that says every day I'm going to think about what new course to sign up to, or even what learning path to sign up to, right? However, what we do is we pop into Flipboard or LinkedIn or YouTube or Facebook, and we are inspired by an intelligent personalized feed that's telling us, here's a 2-minute or a 3-minute piece to sate our curiosity within that 2-3 minute gap that we're using on mobile phones for 200 minutes a day to. So you've got that second piece. And then I think, as Nikhil said, absolutely, I think there's intelligent creative part at the macro level, which is about, okay, well, I want to have a major change in career or upskill myself in an area, and I want that intelligent part to be doing. So I think when we think about personalization, right, we're thinking of personalization at 3 levels, and also understanding that the technology is now there to understand all the content much deeper. In the same way, we've now got the same technologies to understand, just as Google understands the external world of content, we now have that same capability. And I think what we're seeing now is a world of knowledge management and learning come together. So we understand our content intelligently, we understand our people intelligently, and therefore we can start to marry the connection between these three at those 3 different levels, at the micro, the macro, and the nano level.
Paras, very quickly, if I may, just kind of wanted to build on this. I think it's quite interesting. I mean, see, if you, and I'm talking from a bank perspective, I'm sure it's no different in other organizations as well. If you look at the changing trends of our clients, right? The clients are kind of now really asking this question about saying, allow me to bank where I want to bank, allow me to bank the way I want to bank, kind of thing. So I think that's the big change we need to understand from an L&D perspective, that our learners are putting up a big question saying, so personalization for me is allow me to learn what I want to learn. Don't push things on me and say this is personalization. That's not personalization for me. At least that's what I think. So allow me to learn what I want to learn. Allow me to learn the way I want to learn. And that's the bigger challenge, right? How do you create different or multi-usage channel for people to learn a similar kind of our content depending on their learnability skills? And the third point is allow me to learn when I want to learn. And that's kind of brings in the freedom of learning. So I think when, at least in Standard Chartered, what we are trying to really solve for or directionally moving towards is to look at these three areas and say how we can really provide something that allows our learners to answer these questions.
No, and Rajesh, I want to come to you with this question that's come from the audience as well, because it'll be great to see a real experience of that. Someone just asked us, how do you actually see we're talking about e-learning, we're talking about customization, personalization, but as a company, how do you see the effectiveness of e-learning or online learning? And what kind of assessment have you put in place that can measure ROI?
Okay. I think it's a question. I mean, we've all been familiar with for quite some time, like people who are in the business of learning. I think there are a couple of things here. The first one is that we need to start thinking about value creation in the process. That's the first step. So the way we look at is that every single intervention that you present from your learning shop may not necessarily result into a clear-cut ROI. However, you need to be very selective and purposeful and start creating value for the bigger items that you are investing in. And those bigger items, the simplest way to do that is basically looking at the lagging and leading indicators. How do you impact that? I mean, see, I'll give you an example. A simple example to do is I can pick up a corporate banking example. Now that's like, if I create a client advisory program, and we are saying that as a result of the client advisory program, we want our revenue to go by 10%. Right now, it is very unrealistic thing to put up because your outcome of revenue is dependent on multiple factors. The client advisory intervention is one of them. So it's not only, I mean, you can't go and raise your hand and say, because we have done an excellent client engagement initiative, our revenues have gone up. No, you can't claim that. There are many things that happens. What you can really claim is a change in behavior of your relationship managers that has led to that revenue up and down kind of stuff, right? That's simple to do. You look at saying today, for example, you have a relationship manager whose portfolio touch point was 30%, and after the program, the portfolio touch point has gone by 40%. So you can claim to that saying that, look, here is what we have been able to mobilize or enable change in behavior of somebody for that person to enable to drive revenue. So the point I'm trying to drive home is that ROI is a element that you need to be very smartly thinking of what needs to be putting up, and not directly going and saying that everything gets impacted through learning. So in our organization, I think slowly what we are trying to see is this whole leading and leading indicator kind of a concept. And we have been very clear. I mean, see, we sit in the business forums, in the business councils, and the conversations that we have is, this program is not going to, I mean, you cannot say that you put up a program and drive revenue for me. You put up a program, considering the other ecosystem matters equally, you drive change behavior, you drive enablement, and that drives revenue. So I think that's the funnel that you need to go through as you decide the ROI.
Can I jump in on that?
Please, yeah.
And to respectfully challenge that, I think in nicest way possible. So I think again, if I look at the new models that are coming through now, absolutely, I think we can make much stronger connections between, just in the same as marketing, right? So to me, marketing and learning now are becoming much more akin. So if I'm going to, as a president of a company, founder of a company, right, if I'm going to spend money on marketing, I'm making some assumptions, hypothesis, that if I run this campaign, I'm going to be generating this number of leads, and I know because of previous work I've done, this conversion rate is going to convert if I hit, and therefore I can predict my future revenue. what our clients are now doing is saying every program now, the old way of thinking of learning, right, is I deliver the learning and then I try to work out what the value is afterwards, right? And that's, I think, to the point, it's never going to work, right? That's almost impossible to do. The more, I guess, data-driven way to do towards it is you're starting with that question, right? So you're starting with a question that says, I want to increase you take one of our clients like Hilti, 20,000 new salespeople come on board and they know that their time to competency is 12 months or time to payback, that they're saying is 12 months. So their hypothesis is if we can understand what the best people do, and we can codify that knowledge, we can develop people in that way, we can give them the right skills, behavior, and so forth. But their end goal is not skills, it's not competence, it's not a mark. The only thing they're measuring is performance. So and every question they then have is, if I want to move the delta 20 percentage points between the average person and the senior person towards it, and I'm going to keep questioning what's the things I can do to change that. So correlate. So it's looking at both correlation and engagement. So you take another case study. They looked at correlation, understanding what's the correlation between take onboarding. So one way, so you take A/B testing towards it. So one group of people, it's a couple of thousand people over a 1 year period, they're analysed what their NPS score is after 6 weeks of onboarding using one way of doing it, right? So in this particular time, the average score was 12%. Industry average 72% NPS score. Then they developed a different way, which is we're going to teach people we're not going to train them in a 100% classroom. We're going to give them the tools to go and learn themselves, and then we're going to measure how frequently using those tools. So we're going to reduce formal training by 70%, make 30%, but actually now we're going to see who's engaged and who's a poor learner, who's a continuous learner, and that data comes out clearly, right? That the A versus B, and B comes out as an 84% NPS score, 70% difference. And then they start to ask the questions, well, what else can I do to start doing that? And if I can go back to an audience, apply the same techniques that are low performing, and they then go high performing, we go do that. So I think the data, the tools, and the activities are now there to do in-depth correlation. And we see that now amongst most of our most progressive clients.
No, that's a great point, Stephen. And I think that drives the point home. It's important to use L&D as an enabler, and setting the right goals, be it a business goal or an L&D goal, is extremely critical to measure ROI. And it may be different for different companies. We want to get a perspective from the audience as well. And we've spoken about innovation, we've spoken about learnings, and we'll open it now. What aspect of people management faced the largest disruption in your company? Tell us, was it remote working? Was it training and onboarding? Or was it all of them? We'll keep it on for another 15 seconds. But this is quite an important area, because most times, and like Steve and someone mentioned, ROI is measured from a business impact perspective rather than an L&D perspective. And as we go through this evolution of upskilling our teams, this measuring on the right goals is extremely important. So we're going to close the poll in 5. And here we go. Let's see what the results look like. So remote working has come out to be, one of the largest disruption areas, followed by, people thinking 30% of the team, 30% of the attendees think it's all the above. 20% thought it was the training, and 10% thought it was the onboarding in particular. Interesting insights. Mike, coming to you at this point, and we'll kick off with our third area of discussion now, which is around, we've spoken about some of the learning, we've spoken about some of the innovations, but through all of this, there have been challenges in adapting and evolving that e-learning process. What are your thoughts, and what experiences and examples can you share with us within the domain?
Thanks. So I'm going to start by looking at e-learning platforms, and I think some of the challenges that I've noticed over the last year, particularly with the stuff that we've been using at Deutsche Bank, and also a very large US investment bank that I'm now working with for the interns. So, I mean, we mentioned a moment ago sort of personalization when we're talking about learning and we're talking about platforms. But I think actually, as well as personalization, the problem is we need a massive amount of flexibility from e-learning platforms. So, you know, we mentioned personalization, but I think in many ways there can be too much of it. There's typically the learner who wants to go just from A to Z. They just want to say, start at the beginning at A and I want to finish at Z. There's another learner who wants to go from A straight to D and then maybe jump to T. And then there's others who want to start, you know, towards the back and start at W and go to A and move around. So the difficulty, I think, is getting that flexibility that allows you still to have pathways and roadmaps for specific groups of people to say, okay, this is what you need for your particular role. But at the same time, still allowing people to have that personalization and still having that standalone bite-sized session where somebody can go in and say, right, I need to find out about X. You know, I need this for my job in the next 20 minutes. And I want to be able to find this in 2 or 3 minutes. So it's got to have fantastic indexation so that I need to be able to go in and say, how do I value this? Or how do I price this? Or how can I calculate this? And I haven't got 3 hours to do a massive e-learning thing. I just want to be able to go and do that. That, I think, is a massive challenge for the financial industry and also for e-learning platform providers, because I don't think we've necessarily quite got that yet. You know, everyone is concentrated on getting the content, and we are talking a lot about, I know, personalization, but it's actually that flexibility that allows you to do all of those different things for different users on the same platform. I'm not convinced that we've solved that yet. So that's one of the key challenges. The other thing I think, you know, I would like to see as a user a lot more is more up-to-date, relevant content. So what a lot of e-learning providers do, quite rightly so, is they get their core content and they try to make that core content broadly very generic so that it doesn't have to be, you know, recreated every 18 months or so to update it because something's happened. So you get quite generic content that they think, well, this will last for the next 2 years. But actually, as well as that, what I would really like to see is more up-to-date content. So literally, something happened in the market yesterday, here's the explanation for it. And not just, oh, here's what happened in the market, you can do our, you know, e-learning that we created two years ago. It's, here's what happened in the market yesterday, and here's a little bit of learning that's going to take you 3 or 4 minutes to explain it, you know, and you don't have to go through 60 pages of the Financial Times, you know, to see what happened yesterday. It's like, this is a key thing. I'd love to be able to see more of that. And I know that's, you know, probably asking for something a bit too much, but that would be fantastic to be able to see to, you know, a lot of newcomers into the financial industry in particular. So that up-to-date relevant content, just-in-time sessions. And that also, I think, brings me on to another key challenge, which is linked to that, and that's the speed to market. You know, a lot of stuff obviously already exists, but we do in the financial world a lot of customized e-learning. So people in the business come to us and they say, look, we need this piece of e-learning on whatever it might be, the rollout of a new financial product so we can teach our staff, or on LIBOR changing, or whatever it might be. And we say to them, okay, we'll talk to the e-learning provider, and the e-learning provider comes back and says, yeah, this will take anywhere between 6 weeks and 3 months to produce. And the business throw their hands up in the air and go, good God, what do you mean it's 3 months to produce? I want it done in 3 weeks. That, I think, is a massive challenge for the industry in getting quality, tailored content that doesn't take a massive amount of time to produce. And that's more to do with the technology and the way the technology works, and so on and so forth. But to me, you know, if I could find somebody as a buyer, if I could find somebody who would say, yeah, we can produce that 40-minute e-learning, and we can do it in, you know, 8 days, and it's quality stuff, that would be brilliant. You know, you would sell a lot of e-learning platform based around that. And finally, on platforms, I think that this whole area of content versus creation versus curation is an important one. Broadly speaking, I find in the financial world that the content is generally pretty good. You know, a lot of the financial stuff we see, especially the technical content, is very good, you know, and it should be, because most of this is like known now. It's not like 25 years ago when people were going, what's a derivative? You know, there's just masses of information available now to be able to create this type of e-learning content. But I think the curation of the wider content could probably be better, and is a challenge, and I think is something that people are asking for. So curation of videos, podcasts, newspaper articles, academic journals that are based around particular topics. And I know there's problems with copyright and so on and so forth, but I think that whole area probably could be done better in the financial world and by the e-learning providers. And there is of course a problem with that as well. That whole curation piece is that you can be overwhelmed. Okay, so you know, I'll give you an example from one of my previous employers. I won't mention any names, but you know, we could go onto a system, and I had conversations with managers who would go, look, I've been onto the e-learning system. I just want to do a basic management course, and I can see 35 different management courses on there. It's like some of them are an hour, and some of them are 3 weeks. I have no idea which one to do, so I just gave up. So you can be completely overwhelmed by some of the stuff that we see in practice. So it's finding that fine line between curation and not necessarily massively overwhelming people on stuff. So those, I think, are the challenges on e-learning platforms. On the return on investment point, we've mentioned some of this already, but I don't want to go over the same things. But you know, technically, e-learning should be really, really good at measuring return on investment. You know, we should be able to have good data on that. And I think quite often where it falls down is more on the implementation of that. It's more a case of it seems very manual intensive a lot of the time. Data's slow, or it doesn't match what's needed. And that often, I think, is a limitation with the e-learning system being used. You know, I hate to think of the countless hours, you know, my staff have spent, you know, over the last few years actually trying to manipulate data that is, you know, thrown out of an e-learning system on, you know, the return on investment type of stuff, and how has the training gone, and what have we gone, and so on. Obviously, it's important, you know, to build this in right from the very start and bake it in. But actually, that seems to happen very rarely, and we seem to end up with manual processes that take ages. And then the management are saying, "Where's my data?" And it's like, well, we're still crunching it through this Excel spreadsheet because the LMS doesn't necessarily give us what we want. So I think that's a big challenge. On pure, when it comes to ROI, interestingly, I mean, e-learning doesn't necessarily reduce all of our costs, we found. So especially with the pandemic, for example, when we talk about the costs we've saved costs from not moving people around the world and accommodating them. But actual pure training costs, the cost of delivery, the cost of the vendor, and so on, actually that hasn't gone down. If anything, we're probably spending more on e-learning vendors than we did before. Because whereas before you might have a classroom of, you know, 40 people, 50 people, that's actually very difficult to do. And I'm not saying that's ideal, don't get me wrong, but that's very difficult to do with an online virtual training. So actually we're now dividing that up into groups of, you know, 10, 12, 15. So all of a sudden you need 3 trainers where before you would have 1. So actually we're finding we're saving money on accommodation and moving people around. That actually allows us to spend more money on training and on e-learning, which I think is necessarily a good thing. The final thing I think, just on the challenges before I sort of open it up and pass it over, is, you know, this is an evolution. We've certainly in the financial industry, we've all been doing hybrid or blended learning for some years now. So a blend of e-learning, classroom, events, and so on and so forth. What's different with the pandemic, I think, is that as well as the e-learning that is done, you know, that's already been created and is an online piece, we're now delivering our classroom training live online. So in many ways, if you're a cynic, you would probably say what we've done is we've moved, you know, the chalk and talk that you get in a classroom, we've moved that chalk and talk onto chalk and talk on Zoom. And so we still have a lot of all the inherent problems that we had with classroom training still need to be managed with that sort of Zoom style live virtual training. And in some cases, you know, those problems are exacerbated. if you're in a classroom, it's easy to walk around a classroom, physically see what learners are doing on their screens, check out what they're doing and help them out. That's much more difficult to do online. So we need to think much more carefully about how do we actually do that implementation in practice. And as you said, last year it was pretty much a case of, well, this hit us in March. And by the way, we've got all of these people arriving in May and June, and we need to suddenly turn this around. I think trainers generally did a fantastic job on that, but I think that's a whole area for us to learn. And also really those particular platforms, how can we use those better to make it more of an experiential piece of training rather than the old-fashioned chalk and talk. Of course, there are some learners who prefer the anonymity of being online. They're happier to ask questions online that they might not do in a class. So there are some benefits to it. But I think it's that connection between the trainer and the learners that's a challenge, and being able to work out what they're doing on that sort of virtual online stuff. So those to me are some of the key challenges, I think, that we're still grappling with. We've got through a lot of it through, as I said, virtual quizzes, virtual games, gamification, trading simulations, and so on and so forth, and getting people involved. But I think we need sort of more ideas from the e-learning providers as to how we could take that forward.
Yep, no, that was great, Mike, and I think everyone on the panel would sort of agree that the way companies are behaving based on the size and scale of the operation that they run will differ from place to place, and the solution may need to be customized further. Suman, coming to you before I go to the rest of the panel, Mike spoke about digitalization a little bit further. Talk to us, largely about how adapting and evolving the e-learning process has been at Stanchart, but also, how has that impacted the changing landscape of digital learning?
Okay, I think it was great listening to Mike, and I was just reflecting on a couple of things. And so from Standard Chartered perspective, the journey that we took around this was kind of ahead of times, and was before the COVID-19. And there are a couple of interesting facts that I know where we felt that our journey needs to be more towards creating value and really shifting the whole landscape around digital learning. And I'm just kind of going a little broader because when you talk about e-learning conceptually, our mind kind of shifts only one way of learning. I am broadening this up and looking at a digital intervention. And digital intervention could be as simple as I click on the button, I get access to a coach, and I have a coaching conversation. That's the kind of adoption we are doing in Standard Chartered. So it is really looking at the value part of it. And last year, 2018, late 2018 and early 2019 and early 2020, we implemented a learning management platform. I'm sure all of you heard about Edcast. So we partnered with Edcast, and we set up a learning platform called Discover. And Discover is precisely a one-stop learning shop. In probably addresses a couple of points that Mike raised, and I think it's really helped us building the digital adoption in a big way. The first thing, the platform is built on a AI-driven technology, which means that if you set up the taxonomy around the key things, you can actually get instant content pulled out for what's happening in the world. So it's pretty fantastic. So you just need to put a taxonomy around it, and it's like, for example, you want to know the budget in India. If the taxonomy is put in this way, you can click, you can get the budget sourced out, and you can read for it. So I think that's kind of a simple aspect of looking at a change. The other piece around the adoption perspective is, as I said earlier, is really the personalization experience. Now, through Discover, one of the things that we have really done is we looked at the content, and we looked at creating a different learning version of the content. So for example, there's a topic on, say, organizational agility. If you are a learner who wants to learn by watching video, the same content you can get and learn through video. If you are someone who wants to learn by really reading case studies, you have a case study on the same topic in the same level. If you are someone who likes to just listen podcast while you're running in the morning and learn, you can do that. The content is the same. The medium is varied by the style of learning. And if you're someone who's really learned by getting involved in the work, we have created a work and learn fusion model there, which gives you opportunity to bring application into workplace. So there's some really interesting work that we are doing in terms of adoption of digital thing more broadly in the organization. The two important points that I want to kind of make before I hand it over back to you, is one is, what we believe is that the key change that we need to really strive, and this is a journey. I mean, I don't call ourselves being very mature in this stage, but I think the journey that we have taken really is to what we call is humanly digital. So basically, the medium is digital, but you drop in the philosophy and principles of being human. And an example of that is really what Mike was talking about. How do we create some quick bite-sized stuff through brain training model? So we are really looking to understand the human mind, how it reads. And I think there was a question I saw in question and answer column where somebody's asked that people very quickly get switched off and human retention is very less. How do you engage people on that? It's similarly on those lines. You create brain training approach. You create bite-sized, very small, 5 minutes, 2 minutes brain training engagement that engages people by really simulating it or putting it in a game structure. And we have in fact tried out simulation where one simulation can be played across 34 markets, across hundreds of players competing with each other. So there's technology today. There's a high-end stuff possible. And these are few things that we are looking at. And just to kind of leave you with some of the adoption stuff that you've done really well, apart from having very senior members sponsoring this, we have really looked at driving adoption through our People Ambassador program, where we started giving people recognition and credit for investing in learning. And it's not about telling them that I want you to learn a compliance thing. That's not what it is. It's about you learn what you want to learn, and we reward you for that. And I think that's the kind of thing that we are trying to drive from a cultural perspective. And today, out of 100,000 employees, we've got 87,000 employees who are not just active, but are multi-users of the platform in 1 year. So I think we are seeing some very positive outcome of the adoption space that we are playing at the moment.
That's great, Suman. And I think the example that you shared, especially around reward and recognition with L&D, is quite an interesting topic. Rajesh, do you have any thoughts on that?
Yeah, I think Mike touched a little bit on that, and also what Steve mentioned earlier. How do you sort of track the effectiveness? I think the combination of how do you track the effectiveness and also gamification is where the reward part can come in. And I see that actually that's one of the points where we could improve more in general, especially for a large banking kind of setup. Because there's, for example, for upskilling nowadays, what I do is that if people sign up, let's say, for the data sort of skill set that I mentioned, or for lean startup methods, I ask them to also bring some currency. What I mean is that, what are they going to do with it? So that you sort of create like a circle or a cycle that they upskill and they learn something, but they also put it to use or effect. That means that you're getting some sort of a time commitment, right? And that is also something that has to be agreed with their manager, etc., so that you don't have like sort of excuses to just spend, let's say, half an hour, but actually never use it. Because a lot of these upskilling parts actually are only relevant if you use it. Otherwise, you just do a module and it's gone, right? So, and then you also try to make sure that some way it comes in there sort of, mid-year check-ins, etc., so that it's basically something that they feel that they're not doing it because it's thrust on them, and as Suman said, they're doing it because they want to get better. So we have a huge focus on what we call craftsmanship. So everybody needs to sort of focus on their craftsmanship and where they want to take it. And I think it's very good that this has all started before the pandemic, because what has happened in the pandemic is that you see an automatic uptake of this, right? So there's that much less push. There's a lot of pull now. The next stage is going to be, how do we look at using some of the points that some of the panelists mentioned, that you raise the bar or you raise the game to the next level in terms of, I really liked what Mike mentioned about podcasts, and also the element of different ways, and Suman mentioned about how do you make it sort of same content but different consumption formats. We haven't gone that far yet, but that would be like really ideal, because that is indeed what Nikhil had started with, the personalization part. For example, I've hardly read books now. I use audibles, right? So how do you make it something like that, and then also like small enough? And what I like what Steve mentioned is that you give those nudges. That behavioral element is very critical, because everybody's overloaded with information. So how do you also keep a thread that you started this, and this is how far you have to finish it? So something like, what Nike had done with their watch and their shoes and their running and creating a community, etc. So that's the trend that I would think that would really enhance the overall experience.
Rajesh, can I just jump into just a couple of things, I think, just for Rajesh and Mike as well, because I think the answer might be too similar to both of you guys. Around, first of all, the content creation part, right? So something that, when I saw my previous company was an e-learning content company building lots of traditional e-learning courses, and I probably bought a lot of banks, a lot of courses, and if you're one of them, I just want to say sorry, just in case you're a part of the audience. But to solve the problem, we actually looked at the democratization part from a kid's perspective, and actually just something that we, just in the chat panel, something we created for children, which is a philanthropic part, and we just give it for free, is we had the same challenge on what I wanted to do was, how do I democratize education for all children around the world and give them equal access to education? So we knew we couldn't, we knew that, Mike, if I used these additional talent, the traditional techniques used by e-learning, our previous ways of doing it, we probably couldn't do that. So we had to create a new process for creating engaging content. And then the first thing we came up with was a digital first approach to creating content, which is you go find your expert. In this case here, we've created 1,000 videos on all the maths and sciences for secondary school. So 1,000 videos. But the technique is, instead of doing the scripting process or traditional e-learning, we threw that all away. We basically just want to find the best teacher, break down the curriculum into chemistry's 230 concepts, and then literally recorded the most concise explanation, digitally capturing each explanation like fractions or atoms and so forth. Once we've got that raw digital capture, we then give it to the designer. We spend maybe an hour post-producing it, and then anything literally, for some of our corporate clients, spend an hour to get the content out, literally capture it, post-produce it, and push it out. Some take like GSK and so forth, might take 3 or 4 days to do one video, but then have a team of 5, 6 working inside that. So most of the content using the techniques of FuseSchool, and if you look at the FuseSchool comments, right, what you get from the kids are saying, and now understand in 5 minutes what my teacher's been trying to explain to me in the last 2 years. So you've got quality of content, and you've got a 90% reduction in time to create, and a 10 times to create an efficacy. But the second benefit to Rajesh's challenge is, because you're building your content in Lego sizes, you're able to use that content in 3 ways. You're able to use it as a searchable tool, like we do on YouTube. So whether you're using EdCos or Fusion, with direct headset compatible. Just last thing, I was just going to say the last thing. The 3 components of the work, right? If you're building the bite-sized content, you're able to use it in a searchable format. You're able to use it in intelligent AI to bring the stuff through whatever platform you use, and then you can build the building blocks, your learning paths and your creative paths. So to get to that flexible approach, I think a big part to it is how you build those elements in the first place. Sorry.
No, thank you. And Nikhil, coming to you very quickly for a comment here. We've spoken about reward and recognition. Motivation is a key factor that we're trying to drive. What are your thoughts around that?
Look, I think, Suman talked a little bit about it, and Mike talked a little bit about it. I think we more than e-learning like content, etc. We have to create experiences, etc. And I think when we are able to do that, when we're able to sort of create an actual experience which is in line with the job that you require and the skill you require, I think you get success. You don't have to try that hard, etc. We had a client who wanted an analytics appreciation week. Rather than actually, just sending out sort of content or bite-sized content, what he was able to do was create sort of simulation on, save the airline type of thing for a whole week for the whole firm. Now that was very powerful, right? You got the whole people social learning, you got people on analytics as a background. So I guess the point I'm trying to make is motivation will come. I think people will get engaged. It's more around, learning experiences more than e-learning content. Sorry, Paras, I know you're out of time, so I'll head it back to you.
Thank you for that. Lisa, any last thoughts from you around these challenges that we've spoken and solutions as well?
Yeah, I mean, I could probably talk for another couple of hours. I found this so interesting, everyone, so thank you. I think just a couple of things that I kind of picked out of the last couple of conversations is around that kind of how we can get people to understand how they were going to use it. Really simple thing that I've seen work well at one of the organizations we work with is asking people to commit to paying it back. And what we don't mean is the cost of the course, but to share that content back, whether that's in an informal session, whether that's sharing the content. So that's something that could work. The only other thing I wanted to add in here is just to be really mindful, because we've had a lot of conversations with people who said, we've given all these opportunities to people to learn what they want to learn, but they're not doing it. We have to help people understand what it is they want to learn. We have to understand, we have to help people understand what's going to be beneficial. If they spend their time in a particular area, do they care about it? Will their company care about it? So there's a lot more to this, I think, that needs to be unpicked as well.
Brilliant. Yeah, thank you for that. And just for the people listening in, thank you firstly for joining in. We're going to do one quick poll before we close. Tell us, did your company increase e-learning opportunities through COVID-19? And I know it's a quick yes and a no. We'll keep it on for like 10 seconds. If you can tell us, where you've been in your journey through this. Brilliant. So we will try and close the poll now, and the results should be up on our screen very quickly. So as expected, 71% of people attending, their companies increased the learning opportunities through COVID-19. Glad to see that, and I think the space is only building up further. So with that, thank you everybody for listening in. Thank you to all the panelists for taking time and sharing your advice and inputs with us today. Much appreciated. Thank you.
Cheers, guys.
Thanks, everybody. Bye. Bye.
Thanks, everybody.
Bye.
Bye.
Cheers.